So you have to observe them as they are when you're not there, and to get a strength of the signal. But here's the problem. How can you observe them as they are when you're not there? You need to observe, you need to experience the person like they are when you're not there.
Yes.
But you have to experience the person. So that means you have to be there, right?
This is Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah, there's literally a Schrodinger's cat problem. Like if you want to get a signal and to actually, because the question is, how do you strengthen your apprehension? Like, how do you get more conviction in your apprehension? That's where you have this weird thing where you always knew, but then also the process was the making firm the always knowledge.
Exactly.
And that's really important, but the other reason it's confusing is because our concept of time is messed up. We don't have this Hegelian retrospective time, right?
Welcome to my stroll. I wanted to talk about nihilism today and all these attempts that have been made after Kant and Hegel and Nietzsche and Heidegger. I mean, they were really concerned with addressing this problem. Now, in a sense, philosophy has always been concerned with finding a way out from, let's say, the chaos of when there is no contact to the point of things in themselves, things as such, things in their being or in the truth, to a point where that contact is restored, where the human being has a kind of, way to return to that place, where things show themselves in their being, in their goodness, and so on. And this is a very old determination, of also of the Platonic cave. The cave dwellers are in a kind of in an ignorant, in an unknowing, in an inert relation to the being of things. And when human beings are locked into this kind of cave-like state, they also develop a very peculiar evil, a kind of very peculiar brutality that is really also a defining characteristic of the human being as such. It is the case then that other things become more important. Not this point where things are in their goodness, but other things, power, or mostly power. Certain, ideologies, ideas start to take hold of the human being. And then in a sense the cave, becomes populated with shadows. And none of these ideologies or the accumulation of power, it doesn't produce a way out. And today we are in a similar situation, because in a sense we try to bring about a kind of way out through technical means, through scientific means. While these pursuits, they have their validity and fruitful as they may be in their respective domains, they cannot place us in the dimension or in the habit that brings us to that dimension where the being of things, the truth of things, is accessible to us, shows itself to the human being. And what's more is the Second World War, and then what came about as a result of this, mass murder, genocide, nuclear bombs, and so on. These were really like a wake-up call to thinkers. And I mean, I would say today that now with the foregoing pervasion of AI into many more fields of human labor, human activity, and then also again the specters of war again being on the horizon of larger wars, really the need for this way out, which again science and technology cannot provide, that I think will become greater, because only from this point of contact to things in themselves, which the habit that places you in this movement, let's say, towards, and in this habitude, to stand and hold yourself in this space of time where things show themselves in the truth as things, that is wisdom, and surrendering to that is the love for wisdom, that is philosophy. So the more this just goes on, in a sense, in an inert way, I think the more also the need for wisdom will grow, because this uncanny specter of nihilism may come to the fore again, and there will be a recognition of a need that something else, something of a very different kind is needed in order to find a place of rest, to find a place of sufficiency, also to find a place where there's truly like contact with the earth and nature again, for us, truly also contact to our languages, our traditions, and I think this will, so this need for wisdom will inevitably become greater. Now, the two thinkers that have influenced me most, I would say, are Heidegger and Nishitani from the Kyoto School. And in both, there's a really call to come back to to this point of to live in this kind of nearness with things, with things as such, things in their truth. This, of course, is a very subtle distinction that one has to, learn to see and learn to experience. And it is rare that the sense of things shows itself. I think we all have an inkling of it, because as children we are usually more open for such an experience. But this, fades away gradually with growing into adulthood, and that's why then learning becomes so important. So learning to be again in and hold oneself again in such a like say point of contact to the space of time, or the spatiosity of things as such. But I would say, for Nishitani and for Heidegger too, like love is really important, or care is really important in order to realize, the reality of things as such. Love intended as letting be, as Gelassenheit, as releasement. Or love also, we could say also as an act of surrender. Love, in and through this surrendering, this letting go, this emptying, we, in a sense, we do not, we do not give up ourselves really, but instead we free ourselves into our true selves, by caring for, certain beings, or even, being itself. And for Christ, Christ compares, he teaches about, the love of God, agape, by talking about, the love of a parent towards a child, which is it's a radically decentering love, but it's also a kind of an amnestic love, a love of remembrance, because we realize that we ourselves too were loved. And then we realize also that this, like the locus really of this love, does not lie within us, but is in a sense outside of us. And that this love in a sense comes to us, and it's something we participate with. It's something we do not, it's not like that we ourselves, our subjectivity is like the seed, let's say, or the source of this love. It's a very participatory act, and it actually decenters us. It makes us surrender to, our child, our children. And I would say all acts of wisdom, they go hand in hand with this kind of surrender. It's surrendering to language through poetry, surrendering to the phenomena of the world through an art, like music or like painting, surrendering to the body through, and then in such a way loving also the body through, gymnastics or yoga.
This is why, in addition to gymnastics, eurythmy is incorporated into the curriculum as a required subject from the first grades through the highest, from the first years through the highest grades.
The philosophical inquiry, this was very clear for the Greeks. This comes later. You can't, in a sense, to abstractly talk about the good. It's much more difficult when you haven't experienced it. It's easier, when before, you kind of have an experiential knowledge of it because you have experienced perhaps, a beautiful piece of music that moves your heart, and then also have an intimation of, also the kind of surrendering labor that you have to invest in order to master, the art of sound, music, which takes it takes years. It can take a lifetime in order to become a master, in this art. But when you have kind of an experiential knowledge of the good, then it's also easier to talk about and to inquire. Now to come back to what I said about Nishitani and Heidegger. For Heidegger, I mean, the art and poetry are really paramount, central for the realization of this, space of time where things show themselves in their truth and in their goodness. But for Nishitani, it's more about, he thinks, that this point of love can be recovered mostly from within the religious traditions. It's about this, surrendering to another, to this kind of self-emptying, becoming to speak very plainly, becoming a servant to the world, a servant to the to things, you know. Therefore, you know, opening up what he calls the field of shunyata, or emptiness, which is then the place where things can realize themselves as they are, in their suchness. But I think both in these endeavors, like, love is really the primary action. And as you can see, it is in a sense something, because, you know, when you consider the example of agape, you know, of love, this is also something that's much more primordial than, for example, the task of, or the action of doing science or technical thinking, what Heidegger called calculative thinking. Technical thinking is, in a sense, too narrow, too constrained, and then also it brings forth beings in a modality that Heidegger called the Gestell, the standing reserve. The considerations of the planning and calculating human will become more important. The world or things, you know, they're in a sense always tied back to the calculations of the planning will. So I think, you know, Ian McGilchrist, with you know, his analysis of left brain thinking and right brain thinking. And I mean, he makes really the argument that since the age of enlightenment and the scientific revolutions, that left brain thinking, which is very, you know, which is more it can't be, you know, it can't be a master. It's very concrete and detail oriented. It's more representational in its nature. It doesn't take into account the whole, but it's the dominant thinking of our time. And I would say this creates this, you know, this very paradoxical nature again, where we have, you know, technological and scientific progress, but at the same time this uncanny specter of nihilism, this loss of contact with nature, and this profound atomization that is, and then this power competition that is going on so many levels, without any realization of a measure or a degree of sufficiency, of rest, of peace. And then this also, and this is something that haunted me for a long time, you know, this outburst really of evil as well, that always shocked me so much, you know, this outburst of evil, you know, in the 20th century, in the world wars, but then also later, you know, all these regimes, all these horrible things that have happened and are still happening. We really seem to now have, you know, lost our appreciation for our tradition, for, you know, Latin and Greek, you know, studying Latin and Greek, that is seen as, you know, useless basically by an increasing majority of people. Nietzsche declared this the death of God, and I believe that the task that I think humanity is, and I think very soon, in a few years, I think technology will become so pervasive and you know, will have the calculative power of AI, energy consuming as it may be, is already quite, you know, can be quite, you know, frightening. But I think that in the next decade or so, maybe 2 decades, like this question of technology, which Heidegger saw as so paramount. I think we are approaching a threshold where we have to, you know, in the same way, you know, as technology is developing, we also in an equal measure have to develop our innate capacity for wisdom and for philosophy and for thinking. Because also, you know, AI does not operate, you know, independent of the human being, but in a sense is also mimicking and, you know, things, you know, that we are doing, you know, deceptions, biases, lies, slander. And that there will be, you know, great opportunity to use all these technologies for bad purposes, but I mean, more fundamental than that is the Heideggerian diagnosis that technology and science itself, in a sense, bring about a world of beingless beings, just like the ultimate diagnosis of nihilism. And that it needs other practices such as philosophy, poetry, art, or for Nishitani, you know, religions in their highest forms, you know, where it's really about the love for another, in order to bring about another world, in a sense, because only then these practices can open up a world with, you know, where being, in a sense, turns back to us, comes back to us, the flight of God. To quote Hölderlin, you know, the flight of God is interrupted, and they come back to us, the gods, and then a world of, you know, being full beings, you know, lighting up, you know, being with sense, with being, you know, beings freed into their element of you know, lightness, of fittingness, of truth. That world again, you know, becomes accessible to us. Science and technology, just by themselves, you know, they obviously, you know, they help us to be more efficient. They help us create useful things and gain material wealth, and also, in a sense, they have, you know, brought out really that the world has become unified, you know, and that we can travel all around the world and so on. But there's a constitutive lack to these practices and to these techniques and to these forms of knowledge, which only thinking and philosophy can, you know, can be, you know, can be a surrogate. And that's I think how we can not overcome nihilism, because you know, important for this is a kind of acknowledgement also of the groundlessness of the world. So it's not that we find a new ground, but we realize the essential groundlessness of the world, and through that also the, you know, the essential uniqueness of everything, every being. Because, and this will be my closing statement, the place, the space of time where things show themselves as they are, it's also the place of the original self, but it's also the place of no thingness. And then all these, you know, the place where the world is gathered and everything shows itself in its uniqueness.